The issue of foreseeability, even to this day, is a fiercely debated issue in all tort cases. Hi, my name is Stephen Murphy, and I'm a partner here at Block, O'Toole & Murphy. And I'm here to talk to you about a really old law school fact pattern. What's the case called? It's called Palsgraf versus the Long Island Railroad. It is a seminal case that law students all over the country study in their tort classes every single year. It was decided by noted jurist Judge Benjamin Cardozo, who was sitting at the time in the New York State Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in the state of New York. Judge Cardozo later would go on to become a Supreme Court justice in the United States. Cardozo's opinions were legendary, but this is perhaps his most famous. What are the facts of Palsgraf? Well, Helen Palsgraf was on the way to the beach, the Rockaways, with her two young daughters, and she was going to take the train. So she was standing waiting for the train on the platform. There were two men who were about to board a train, and they were a little bit late, so they were helped by a Long Island Railroad employee who helped them get on the train. One of those two men was carrying a small box, a brown box, and as he was getting on the train, he dropped that box. It was an accident, but the box, unbeknownst to the Long Island Railroad employee, carried fireworks, and that box exploded, and the explosion cascaded across the platform down near where Mrs. Palsgraf and her daughter were standing, and it hit a fixed object. And that object came crashing down, and it hit Miss Palsgraf, who was many feet away, as the court described, from where these men were getting on the train. Mrs. Palsgraf sustained some injuries, and she brought a lawsuit. And she prevailed on that lawsuit, at least in the lower courts. As the case rose up the ladders of the New York State court system, it reached the desk of Judge Cardozo. And Judge Cardozo zeroed in on a particular issue that had, at that point, eluded the New York State court system. In a negligence case, he focused on the issue of foreseeability. Really what he was asking is, was the conduct of the railroad worker in helping the man get on the train, a man who was carrying a box that it was by no means apparent in any way dangerous. He had no way of knowing that there were fireworks in there. Was it foreseeable that the outcome that resulted could have occurred? Now, the lower courts never confronted this issue, but Cardozo made it become one of the hot button issues that lawyers would be talking about in tort cases for decades and decades and decades. Cardozo found that the conduct of the railroad employee was not foreseeable in terms of the harm that enveloped, and ultimately ruled in favor of the Long Island Railroad. Poor Mrs. Palsgraf. In your typical tort case, the focus is often about whether or not the perceived wrongdoer, the tortfeasor, had a duty of care to the injured person. In the Palsgraf case, the court concluded that Miss Palsgraf, who was standing many feet away down the platform, was not a foreseeable victim based on the actions of the railroad worker. So she was perhaps outside of the sphere of what was reasonable to perceive as a person that the railroad owed a duty of care to. The issue of foreseeability, even to this day, is a fiercely debated issue in all tort cases. Even though there have been courts in different states that have kind of come out a little bit differently than Palsgraf, foreseeability has become part of the everyday vocabulary of your New York lawyer.